week is Parshas Mikeitz. Then we have the dramatic story of Yosef's release from prison, and he is called into service by the Egyptian king because he's able to interpret a dream, two dreams that the Egyptian king had about years of abundance and years of famine. And Joseph is propelled to the viceroy position that he's the deputy king, and he now has authority on everything that's going on in the kingdom, to prepare from the years of abundance to the years of scarcity. And then interwoven with this is the story of his brothers who had originally sold him into slavery, had no idea what had happened to him, and now they're coming down in the years of famine to look for food. And we can learn many, many different lessons from this. Obviously, Joseph's tremendous success being catapulted from being a slave, not just a slave, but a foreigner who was looked down upon, but to the highest ranks because of the fact that he had God on his lips. He was constantly praising God. He was constantly mentioning God, and he had the humility to acknowledge that everything came from God. And that's what he said to Paro when he was asked to interpret the dream. He said that God will have the answer. I mean, it's not from us. The wisdom and the insight comes from God Almighty. But when the brothers came down coming to acquire food from Egypt, it's a tremendous lesson to us what could happen when we are in a position of needing something, and how we could then be manipulated and taken advantage of, which is exactly what happened to the brothers. Meaning to say, Joseph was a person who sought to serve God Almighty and was doing things for the divine, God's divine purpose, to bring about an ultimate good purpose. But the end result was that in the process of taking the food for abundance, bringing in the excess food for abundance, he then was the controller of all the food. And this has its own consequences to the Egyptian people. But in this week's parsha, we're focusing on the consequences to his brothers, who through a series, and they're not knowing who he was, but through a series of false accusations as to their intentions, accusing them of being spies and putting them on the defensive, and then constantly moving the goalposts as to how they could get themselves back into good favor with him, thinking that at any moment they would somehow just be able to get the food and be able to return safely to their families. He was always one step ahead of them, was always able to outwit them because he sensed they needed something, and he therefore had the power over them to manipulate them according to a scheme, to cause them great distress and to cause them greater and greater imbalance in the sense of insecurity. Instead of feeling grounded, they were more and more confused every time. He would show them harshness and cruelty. He would show them kindness. He would make a decree. Then he would leave that decree. He would change the story. He would change what the decree was going to be. And it's such a lesson for us to remember that we cannot think that any human being has the power and is the only source of our well-being and the only source of our food. Because a person who has bad intentions, and as I said before, even though Joseph was a righteous man and he did not have bad intentions, he was playing with his brothers, so to speak, to bring about a fulfillment of the prophecy that the entire family would bow down to him. But this was a prophetic dream. But this is something that the result was, in order to accomplish this, he was playing a scheme on his brothers and brought them to great, great distress. And not only that, but his brothers, we could see from how they became so caught up in the scenario that Joseph was painting for them, that they began to think that somehow what he was saying made sense. And they came back to convince their father to release the youngest son, who Jacob, our forefather, was afraid to let go of his son, that something bad should not happen to, God forbid. They were convincing their father, oh, but we have to do it because he's the man with the food. If we don't do it, we're not going to be able to get any food. They actually bought the reasoning of Joseph. They began to think that this is the only way. And they finally convinced their father to give up Joseph. But every time they gave in, they had to give up more, until the climax of this week's Parsha is that the very last, most precious thing that Jacob was trying to keep from falling into this trap, they convinced Jacob to put him into the trap. And not only that, but Joseph then pulled a fast one on them, implanted not only the money, but his silver goblet into the sack of Benjamin, his youngest son, his younger brother, the youngest son of Jacob, and boom, had him arrested and said he's the one he's going to keep in prison for his crime. Therefore, pushing the brothers to the point of absolute, complete crushing as a result of the power that he wielded because of the power that they put into his hands by coming to him as the authority, making him the sole person. And not only that, but people, this was a setup going back years because the king of Egypt made everyone turn in their surplus food into Joseph. And he ended up being the only one controlling the food. So therefore, we should take a lesson for ourselves. God's instruction to us is that no, we cannot let one man or one central authority be the authority that controls our well-being, controls our food, controls our money, controls our access to healing resources. But rather, we have to remember that God is the source of all those things, and he will provide what we need. And we should not, therefore, line ourselves up to take food boxes, to take things that we think, oh, the government's giving us these things, but they're conditioning us to be in the mode of need, to think that, oh, we need these things. We cannot survive without them. They're the people with the food. They're the people with the checks. They're the people with the healthcare. They're the people with these things. Therefore, we must do what they say. Otherwise, they won't give it to us. And we can see the true destruction that was wrought upon the brothers from this. Now, miraculously, it turns out that Joseph was their brother, and that was his real intention, was only goodness for them, and he put them through a stressful period in order to bring out the better. But that was the beautiful silver lining of the story, as we'll see next week. And however, we can learn from this how a man who takes power over his brethren can wreak absolute slavery upon them. And that's our job. As each person, we have the choice. It's based on our conduct and our thinking and the way we look at things to remain free of that and not allow ourselves to get entrapped in the crooked thinking, the crooked logic of an endless number of rules and game changing and good cop, bad cop, and warm and cold and friendly and hostile, and all the different games that are played by men who seek to control their fellow men. And if we learn that lesson from this Parsha's Mikeitz, we'll be well on our way to establishing the independent connection of each human being, the decentralized command, the decentralized connection of every human being to God Almighty, which is the era of Mashiach, the time that will come when every human being will learn directly from God Almighty and will not even need teachers anymore. Although there'll be a transition period when it'll be our honor and our responsibility to help everyone else to be able to see, oh, there's nothing besides God in the world. But ultimately, the ultimate intention is for them to be built, to be people who themselves are able to directly learn from God Almighty. That is God's goal. And that's what our goal is. And our goal is to stand every man on his own 2 feet so that he's not dependent on any other human being, but he's only dependent on God Almighty. And that is the ultimate redemption, for the coming of the righteous Redeemer, righteous Mashiach, which will be a redemption for the entire world. Every human being will have everything they need in abundance and have the dignity of their well-being and their unique contribution to God's creation, because God is putting into the effort to create them at every moment. That will be revealed, the unique contribution of every single person, and be revealed that in the midst of all the differentiation and the variation that we have between each person, the common denominator is God Almighty that's bringing us all to life. We should merit to experience that now, immediately. And have a good Shabbos and a happy Hanukkah. On this, the 5th night of Hanukkah, we should merit to bring even more light into the world, the light of the teachings of the Torah, to bring godliness and the awareness of God Almighty, who's taking care of us, into every single human being in every corner of the world. Good Shabbos and Freilich Hanukkah.